Today on CityCast Chicago, thousands of asylum seekers are facing mass evictions, what to do with 10 blocks of public land under the red line, and if you need some Chicago advice, hey, the CityCast team got your back. Here with me to break it all down is executive producer Simone Alisea. It's Tuesday, January 23rd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Morning, Simone. How you feeling, G?
I'm okay. How are you, Jacoby?
G, I'm doing good. I'm still riding off that Packers loss. I'm not even finna lie to you. I'm not even finna hold you. It's going to push me through this week. Every Tuesday, if you're new to CityCast Chicago, the team sits down and we look at some stories that we're paying attention to the news, some things we saw viral on social media, but we also talk about some stories that are populating our newsletter, Hey Chicago, as well. And Simone, let's start with a story we've been talking about for almost 2 years now. And this is a story when we think about the over, 30,000 migrants and asylum seekers that have made their way to Chicago in the last year and a half. It's one of those stories that it feels like every day, every week, there is maybe small updates or suddenly major changes. And now in the next week, it feels like we're at one of those watershed moments that a year, 2 years from now, we will talk about the decisions made in late January, early February 2024, because now those asylum seekers who have been staying at city shelters are slated to face their first evictions starting next week at the top of February because of a limit on shelter stays imposed by the Johnson administration. And like almost everything that has taken place throughout this last year and a half, there are tons of confusion. Simone, what are the details? We know that the initial date got pushed back because of those below zero temperatures, but now the city is saying February 1st.
Right. So just to kind of get the timeline here, Mayor Brandon Johnson announced this limit on shelter stays, this 60-day limit back in November. And the idea was basically that if you put a timeline on shelter stays, that will hopefully put pressure, encourage folks to get some kind of permanent housing lined up to get out of the shelter so that more people can come in, you free up beds. Now, when this announcement was made, the city was still planning on building those big tent encampments that never happened. The state had also and has continued to kick in some extra money on that rehousing front, right, to help migrants find housing. There are plans to build to provide more shelter beds, but the details of that still haven't become clear. And as you mentioned, we had those frigid temperatures, so the deadline for that first round of evictions, that 60-day limit coming up, has been extended twice to February 1st. By the numbers, we're looking at some 2,800 people facing eviction from these shelters next week, and potentially more than 6,000 people by the end of the month. The mayor's office says they told Block Club Chicago that they are finalizing changes to this policy, the 60-day policy, but we're still waiting for more info. That's supposed to come in the next few weeks or so. But basically what migrants and advocates are saying is that, like, this is really confusing. We don't know where we're supposed to go. We're getting these notices. Some of us are getting notices. Some of us are not getting notices.
People are rightfully going to be saying, hey, I just got here and I got to face 60 days. But there are some folks who've been here for months, and it shows because they are still using the temporary shelter facilities that it's not easy to get a work visa. It's not easy to get into more permanent or even temporary housing. And I understand the city is trying to make clear, like a sort of plan, a framework, right, something that you tell people when they arrive, this is the system. This is where you can go for processing. This is where you can go for educational resources. This is where you can go for work resources. And this is what the limit is. But again, everything has felt so rushed in a sense that we're announcing a plan that we don't have a true framework for. It's creating more problem because what did they say? That people who are evicted then have to sort of start the process over back at the processing.
Yeah, you go back to the processing site and you reapply for shelter, which you can imagine if you're somebody who is, struggling to get permission to work in this country, let alone find the job, which is hard, again, frankly, hard for everybody right now. Why make me go through that process again and potentially just to maybe get a bed and why not just let me stay here? And then I think the timing of it too, is another issue that people like. Why do this during January and February, the absolute
Dog.
coldest time of the year?
Which like that's one of the thing they said when they were proposing to build these winterized base camps. It's like, hey, winter is coming. We cannot have people outside. We cannot have people wondering where they can get shelter. And then as that was breaking down, they say also during January and February, we're going to start kicking people out and having them restart the entire process, which is, again, understand that room is running out, that tensions are running high. But that's the exact problem you said you wanted to avoid at all costs.
And now you've also, too, the Chicago Sun-Times spoke to some advocates and folks in New York, which imposed a similar 60-day policy. And they said that is basically what happened, is this policy went into effect, folks were evicted from shelters, and now they have more people living on the streets. Basically, what some of these advocates from New York are saying are like, brace for chaos. Like, it is going to be even more confusing and more chaotic.
And according to that same Sun-Times article, since New York implemented their own limit on shelter stays, 23,000 people have sort of been forced to relocate. And a lot of those people, Illinois is the top flight destination for asylum seekers leaving New York.
I am curious to see, again, the mayor's office says there's changes coming to this policy. What are those changes going to be? Are we going to hear more about these, adding more shelter beds? What is the new shelter plan? Next week, I think, is going to be a really, really key, as you said, a key moment in this as we see how the city responds.
To our second story of the day, Simone, up in your neighborhood, construction has continued on the Red Line, both between Uptown and Edgewater. And now the CTA and the city are trying to bring community members in to say, hey, what are we going to do with the new public space that's created under these tracks? I believe there's at least 10 blocks of open land, and they're making proposals. Should we create a bike lane? Should we, bring in extra parks and more community space? And so now people have an opportunity to have their voice heard, what they think should be done with this. So that kind of got you and I thinking, how would we use the space under the tracks? But also, as we think about these projects moving forward, the hope is more tracks are improved, the Red Line extension on the far south side. There are opportunities that more community space is going to be created. What do you think they should do with it?
So basically what's happening is like the embankment wall that was, used for these tracks, with the new tracks, they don't need it. And so it opens up this big old space under the Red Line tracks. And the CTA says this is the first time that the agency sort of has an opportunity to create some kind of green space, public space, something to be done here. The CTA put out a few renderings of some of the stuff they're thinking about, things like a jungle gym, a basketball court, but also like tables that you could sit at to eat. And I think if, they have limits on what they can and can't do. There's also talk about potentially putting in parking, which I'm sure people will have different opinions about. It's not.
Yes. No.
I don't know if it's how I want to, like, my first choice for using public space, but I get the concept.
If it's partnered with, like, you open up parking under these stops, and then so we're converting parking on the street to better, more efficient bike lanes, to more efficient bus only lanes.
Right. That's the thing. If we're going to take parking off the street.
But if it's just parking for parking's sake, you out your goddamn mind.
Yeah. Not my favorite idea as far as when we get new space available. Let's make something out of it. That said, on all the renderings, there's only one of the renderings that like pictures what it could look like in the winter. Because a lot of this is like this is all outdoor space. And so I think anything that can kind of be used all year round, whether that is sort of anything that can be covered or can you bring heaters out, I would love to see any kind of place for local business incubation, retail, shopping, like something where I could really kind of get to know neighbors and stuff. Like, I don't know, like if we're going to walk along something, I don't just want to walk and see pretty things. I want to be able to to do some stuff, buy some stuff even.
I think a good potential model is Boxville over off the 51st Green Line stop in Bronzeville. And it's this, like you said, local business incubation where they've taken former shipping containers and sort of, created small little businesses. There was a small museum in one. There was the hot dog box, which moved up to the Northwest side. That's where they got their original start. Their small little jewelry stores. There was a vegan restaurant in one of them. And so it just became an opportunity to where I'm going to have to pass by this. If I'm getting on or off of this stop, this is a perfect place potentially to sort of meet customers where they are at. But also when I was looking at some of these renderings, the basketball court looked amazing. But there were a few that, like, just the idea of how to use the bottom of the train tracks
track itself.
Like one made it kind of look like the reflective material you'd see on the beam. So it's sort of like a mirror as you were walking. Another
that could
one
get very trippy very fast, though.
Very trippy, very fast. Another one kind of looked similar to that kind of lightscape you see at O'Hare when you're going on the sort of walk past the walkways. It's a very cool idea. I think this, when people think about sort of evolving public space, how do we think about infrastructure improvement, neighborhood change, and including space to sit down, to have fun, to meet up? These are the kind of ideas people want to see. And this is, as you look through the mockings, it's very cool to see public art next to public entertainment, next to some cool artistic aesthetics, all underneath the red line.
Well, and it's cool too, because if you come up here, there's already so much art, around the red line, particularly like between Lawrence and Wilson. And so I think it would just be like a great extension of that. I don't know how you would do this with the sound, but it would be cool to have like a performance space, where you can have buskers come in and again, with the noise of the train, maybe it can be, I don't know. So some engineer, designer out there who is smarter than I am, maybe can figure out how to make it work.
Early, I sent you this, the new Wilco video, where they shot a whole video inside of the rink. And, I didn't grow up necessarily knowing who Wilco was, grew up skating. So this video kind of seemed like the marriage of two different Chicagos in some way. But seeing a roller rink underneath the red line on the north side, I think would be a cool aesthetic from the kind of pictures I could get from that.
And maybe they could turn it into an ice rink in the winter. I don't know.
Come on, right? Then we got
someone
utility.
Who is smarter than me must be able to figure this out. I have to imagine.
If you want to check out the renderings or, get your voice heard on what you think, check the link in the show notes for more information. Before we get out of here, in our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, we are starting up an occasional segment where you ask us the Chicago questions you need advice on, and we find you some answers. Yes, I could have just said we were starting up an advice column, but I want to explain it out a little bit. And we already got one. Reader Ruby S. emailed us on behalf of her sons who are in a band, wanting to know how can up-and-coming musicians book gigs across the city. Simone, you don't play in a band or nothing, but you like live music. You like going out to see people play. What would be your advice for somebody?
Yeah, it was funny when we got this question because all of us on the team were like, well, none of us are musicians. Can we actually answer this question? And I think the sort of right off the bat, the first thing all of us were like, well, go to shows where people who play your kind of music are playing, and go network and go talk to them, go meet them. One of our colleagues, Caroline Patton, marketing manager at CityCast, runs the Chicago show calendar and is out at shows all the time. We tapped her for some advice, and she mentioned, finding local showcase nights. Places like Empty Bottle, Sleeping Village will do shows that are explicitly about showcasing local acts one right after the other, getting to know the DIY scene. If you make friends whose music you like, can you guys go, put up a show in an apartment or in another coffee shop that you've got ties to? I think that is sort of the biggest thing.
My advice would be maybe to put the instruments down for a second and go to more live Chicago storytelling. I'm going to tell you why. As somebody in the community, I would think that most of Chicago storytelling really is just about giving people a place to get up, to talk about themselves, the things they're interested in. But if you're a performer and you're looking for potentially much larger crowds than you may get at an open mic, if I'm thinking about Grown Folks Stories, which is routinely held in the Promontory, this is an opportunity to maybe perform in front of 100, 150 people telling a story. But also what you'll notice is while you're there may be other people who are telling stories about being musicians. You might also find other people who play instruments at these storytelling events. I remember the Stoop held out at Rosa's Lounge on the West Side. They also often had a live band playing as well. And so like if you can sort of get into the storytelling community, you'll often get sort of more times than not either free or very cheap opportunities to perform in front of a lot of people on a stage, right? The Promontory is a place that hosts live music. If you want to go to like the Moth, which is often hosted at Lincoln Hall, a place where live music is hosted. And so easy way to get on stage. And then you can meet people. The host of Grown Folks Stories, Lawrence Binky Tofree, is a comedian. He is a musician. He hosts open mics and sort of live music events inside of his art space. Like going out to these shows, you can also meet the kind of people who can put you on, point you in the right directions.
And that's the other thing too, is there are a lot of, variety shows in Chicago where you might find that, a comedian or a storyteller wants a band to open, right? Wants some kind of music opener, right? That's another.
Or a closer, the Not That Late show, which I just did. With the homies up north, they finish every show with a local Chicago band.
And then the last tip, I think that is a really good one that Caroline mentioned, is making sure that you have your music somewhere for people to see, whether that's Bandcamp, whether it's on social media. Somebody's got to be able to look you up and actually hear what you sound like if they're going to book you. And actually making sure to like call and DM venues directly. Like if you don't reach out to them, you don't know.
If you got some Chicago questions or you need some shy advice, maybe we can help you out. Check the link in our show notes where you can ask your questions, or you can always leave us a voicemail or a text at 773-780-0246. Leave your name, your neighborhood, and your question, and we got you. As always, I appreciate you, executive producer Simone Ali Sayed, for having my back. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, glad to be here.
Before we let you go, some good news. We just spent all that time talking about open mic, so it's only right I give you one of my favorites. Respect the Mic, Chicago's most intimate open mic, is back for their first show of the year this Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. at Positive Space Studios in Logan Square. As always, we appreciate you for listening, reading, subscribing to our newsletter, Hey Chicago, following the website, and if you really love us, becoming a member of CityCast Chicago by going to membership.citycast.fm. We're going to be back here bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow.